Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. So today we're going to start on a pretty intensive project for my 2012 Audi R8 V8. So there are two known issues that are wrong with the R8 in general. One is their magnetic ride suspension usually goes out, which I have replaced on my car. Number two, unfortunately, is the AC. So we have to reinstall or install a new compressor, new AC dryer, and a few other parts as well. Let's listen to one quote that I got. I did a lot more research, of course, but here's one quote for this job.
With tax, you're looking at about $1965. That's for the compressor, the dryer, and a couple O-rings as well.
Do you have a quote for labor to do that project?
Right, a little bit over $2,100.
Now, after doing a lot more research after that, turns out that was for the V10 engine. The V8 is a lot more extensive as far as labor involved to replace the compressor. For the V10 and the R8, as well as the V10 and the Gallardo, it's about a 6 to 7 hour job. For the V8, they quote about 17 hours worth of labor, which is close to $4,000 just for labor alone. That does not include any of the parts. So I'm doing this project for just under $1,000. I have my new compressor. With any compressor, you have to replace the AC dryer. I have some gaskets for the intake manifold, as well as a few O-ring seals. I may have to get a few more as well as we dive into this project. So I have the car up on jack stands right now. Skid plates are off in the back, so that way I can gain good access to the compressor. Now, it might be a little bit hard to kind of show you where I am here, but here is the driver's side rear tire, so facing backwards, of course. That is the compressor right there. Tucked up underneath, we have a thermostat and a water pump, and we have a couple things that we have to take apart underneath before we jump up to the top of the vehicle. So one thing that I already went ahead and did was way up in here, you might be able to see there's the drive shaft right there, that black piece right in the middle. So this AC is actually driven by a drive shaft, and so there's bolts on the back of that compressor that I was actually able to get to without having to pull the motor. There's a few places I called where they actually remove the engine in order to do this project. And so that is one way of getting around it, getting extensions up there. So I have this setup right here with the 90 degree and the 5mm in order to get those 6 bolts off the back of the drive shaft. So from there, I think that's going to be the easiest way to release the drive shaft or release it from the compressor itself and go from there. Never done anything AC related on any vehicle, and so might as well start off on the R8. We got some work to do. My brother will be here soon. Let's get into it. So first up, what I've done, as you saw in the last part of the time lapse, this is all of the coolant. So that is one of those tubes released. I have one on this side. There's also one up on the other side. I removed 3 of these bolts for this coolant line here. So with that first coolant pipe off, it went from here to that hole up there. We had a few hoses that were attached to it, and we got even more coolant that came out of that pipe. So from there, we can work on the thermostat and the water pipe, or the water pump on this side. Everything I've been using so far is a T30, and so I just got to figure out what parts are going to, bolts are going to have to come off to get to that. So we have removed the water pump and the thermostat. A little bit of oil is still dripping right there. There's a drive shaft right in the middle for that water pump. And now we have better access to the compressor right here. However, now this pipe right here on the right has to come out in order to give us clearance to get that out. In order to do that, we have to jump up to the top of the car and take pretty much the whole top of the engine off, because this is the rest of that pipe. Snakes around here and then goes all the way up, disappears underneath the intake manifold. So that is a good bit of work. A lot of oil came out, so I'm basically doing an oil change as well. because the oil came out of right there. And I also have a small leak right here. It's the refrigerant pipe just above the drive shaft right here. So that's another seal that I will have to fix. We now have everything disconnected except one hose from the intake manifold and the engine. Everything in the back, of course, is out of the way. Our goal is to get this up on top of this bracket here to see where the rest of this tube goes to disconnect it. So you ready?
Yep. Can you lift it a little bit higher?
Yeah.
All right.
How's that?
All right, there's the one
Is that good?
cable.
Yep.
The one plug.
Yep. All right, we're free.
I'll let you do the honors.
It's heavy.
Yeah.
It's heavy, so hold on a sec.
We'll both do the honors.
You ready? I'm gonna have to move again. All right, got it?
Yep.
And then we have to loosen this, and I'm not sure what else underneath. If we do that, we might be able to pull it right up out of the car.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything under the car that we have to get to, but let's go ahead and do that. Join me underneath the car now, where we have, are these oil lines? Some kind of oil lines that came out of this side. We have a bunch of other hoses that we have taken off. We are now working on the compressor itself, where we actually have it wiggling because we have the 3 bolts out, and now we're just working on these 2 AC vacuum hoses or lines that are the last 2 bolts connected to the compressor. Now, one thing to note, when we started to take these lines off, obviously with a compressor, there's going to be compressed air inside the system. So I had all my safety equipment on, and we slowly started to loosen one of the bolts. And when it did, Freon went everywhere. You see, that's Freon, right?
Yeah.
All the green on my fingers is what coated that pipe, if you can grab this bolt. So you just have to be aware when you're doing AC work, it's going to be a compressed system. And obviously I have to go get it refilled and recharged once we are done. But with both of these lines out, we should be able to start wiggling this compressor on out. Now it's going to be a little bit tricky. There are some tabs that hold this in place in some areas, and it's just a little bit tight, especially with whatever kind of heat shield is behind it in the back. All right, so I've been at working this compressor for probably about an hour, hour and a half. These pry tools are going to be your best friend. There is one of the bolts that attaches on the lower section of the compressor is in a groove in the back. And so basically, after some time, I figured out if I could get one of these ends underneath that, I could pop it up and over the rest of this metal. And from there, I am so impressed that I was able to do this. Honestly, I did not think this was going to work at all. It is so tight in there, but here is the old compressor. So if I show you guys here, hopefully I can get the light to work for you. There is a groove right there that bolt was attached to. There's really no lip or anything here. Except for that area, which was this section right here. So that entire chunk on the back is what was holding up the entire compressor from coming out of the car. And so in the far back, that is the plate. There's actually 6 bolt holes that you can see. I went ahead and removed those the first thing that I did. So that is actually in relation to this right here, the backside of the compressor that spins. So I have the old compressor next to the new compressor just so there's a little bit better lighting. I went ahead and took out the drive shaft too. Now this is drive shaft driven for the compressor. So this is that piece that I mentioned earlier. This attaches to the back. This is almost impossible to separate, so I'm just going to reuse this as it is. So we have the new one there that we could attach to it, but unless I really do some work, I think it's just better off leaving that as is. So with the new compressor, there's only one thing that I had to carry over from the old one. There's this metal sleeve ring right there that was installed over here. Everything else looks virtually identical. And then we have the connectors here that I will remove. Those are these two holes here for those AC compressor lines. I think this is the biggest hurdle for the job, and then everything else is just basically putting it back together. I do, however, have to remove this tire to replace the dryer, so I will show that, of course, later. Not too much to film putting this back in. It's kind of just very, very tedious work, so hopefully you at least saw enough of it to get a good sense of what it is like. Those 6 bolts that I mentioned earlier on the back side of the compressor, I just got done putting back on the car. So I actually had to buy a special tool for this project. This is called a crankshaft socket. I'll show you how to use that in a second. I also bought a 90-degree adapter there for the end of this massive extension. So with the 5mm on the end, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see all the way up there, but those are the bolts on the far back. Maybe you can see that little bit of glimpse of silver right there. That is one of the 6 that I had to get this on. What's really cool about this crankshaft socket is the fact that you can manually turn the engine. So what I can do, if you can see that circle of 6 bolts, this goes right in the middle of that. It's a little bit hard to see, and I'll put it in between that circle in the middle that I just showed you. It's easier to do this with 2 hands. And I can simply rotate the engine. It's a little bit stiff to do it, but that, since the compressor is drive shaft driven, that will get me for that to turn around. So that way I can get to all 6 of those bolts. And that's tough. I am working with like this much room in order to do that. So with that last bolt done, the compressor is 100% installed. Time to keep putting this thing together. All right, we have the car on the ground. It is almost ready to drive. We have to fill it up with coolant and oil. Now, if you own an R8 and you decide to tackle this, drain your oil, drain your coolant before you start draining it out of random pipes like I did. I didn't realize that I was basically doing an oil change and a coolant flush for this. So this project, we're into this day 3. We have about 22 hours into it so far. And from Audi, they give you about a 17-hour job time and some other shops. So it wasn't just Audi that I called, of course. I did some research with other shops around us that specialize in European brands and things like that. So for having not done this before, a couple hours after a pro and not pulling the engine, I think is pretty awesome. And also from the shops that I got quotes from, you're looking at right around $6,000 for the V8. In the beginning of the video, like I mentioned, that was for the V10. Just however they have it positioned is much easier on the V10. So about $6 grand versus the roughly $900 that I have spent in all the parts, all the oil, coolant. I bought a few specialty parts like that crankshaft socket, but other than that, just under $1,000 basically to do this in the garage. 6 of the price, and I got it done in pretty record time, I will say. With the coolant topped off, it is time to fill this up with oil. I went ahead and changed out the oil filter too. It's top mounted on this car, so figured with the intake manifold out of the way, might as well do that too. So let's fill this up with oil and then we can fire this up. Fluids are topped off now. We're going to start it up, make sure there's no leaks, make sure there's no check engine lights as far as any of the fluids go. I'll probably have to let it circulate just a little bit and top it off in a little bit, but here's a 3-day cold start up in the garage. So there we have it, doing the new AC compressor and all those components for my R8. If you're watching this video, everything went well because now I need to take it to the shop to get them to do the refill and recharge since we decompressed the entire system. And so first time doing that project, honestly, it wasn't that bad. And for less than 1/6 of what other shops would charge to do this and even pull the motor, we were able to get this done right here in the garage on jack stands. And now hopefully I will now, since you're seeing the video, have AC for the R8. I've been driving about 3 weeks without it, and that is definitely not fun. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, doing a project on an exotic car like this. You don't have to break the bank in order to afford them for the maintenance. If it's something that you're willing to put in the time and effort like this, I could have gone out and spent 6 grand, but it was a lot more fun learning this process and of course saving that money for other projects and other parts and things like that. So if you enjoyed today's video, give it a huge thumbs up. Consider smashing that subscribe button. We'll see you guys in the next video.